Welcome back, 4th Battalion. It's the Crucible Call, back at it again. I'm one of your hosts, Cadet Ethan Hominick.
And I'm the co-host, Cadet Joe Brown. And now for our guest of honor, Oscar CO, Cadet Will Connolly.
How's it going, guys?
It's going good for us.
Good.
Good day, Friday. Weekend is finally here.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the topic of the day, of the week, we're going to be talking a little bit about Oscar Company. We gave the HTs the spotlight last week. Now it's going to be our other companies here in 4th Battalion, this week starring Oscar. We're going to be covering a little bit about what it was like during New Cadet Week, sort of behind the scenes, what it's like to be CO, cadre, all those wonderful things. But before we get on to that, Cadet Connolly, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing here, ROTC, things of that nature.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so as I said, I'm Cadet William Connolly. I'm originally from Downingtown, Pennsylvania, but I now live in New Bern, North Carolina. I'm studying aerospace engineering, and I'm Navy ROTC.
Awesome. All right. Do you want me to go ahead and start with the questions?
For sure.
Sweet. All right. So first question. This is going to be about New Cadet Week, Cadre Week. So got to work with a bunch of different and a lot of great people. What was one moment that really stuck out to you that seemed real meaningful or was your favorite during those 2 weeks?
Right. So one of the most impactful moments that I saw was during Cadre Week. So that's the 2 weeks before classes start, the week before freshmen get here. And so the way 4th Battalion works is that COs and XOs come from within company, and first sergeants move companies. So my current Oscar first sergeant is from November company. November's first sergeant is from Oscar company. And the tricky part with that is that they don't have a relationship already established with the cadre team that comes from Oscar. So Cadet Hunter Manley is my first sergeant right now. He had to, while training the Oscar cadre and getting them to where they need to be for when the freshmen get here, he had to also integrate himself and develop those relationships at the same time. So he had 2 different jobs to do at once. And I would say it was probably 2 to 3 days before the freshmen got here during cadre week that it was like a flip had switched and they really started to connect with each other. Right? They were just on the same page. If one person had a thought, they all agreed, right? They're all on the same wavelength. And it really sped training up and made grasping things and teaching each other a lot more efficient. So I give a lot of props to him for being able to do that during cadre week, because it's not something that a lot of people are able to do, but because of his attitude and his desire, knowing that his goal was to have everybody ready for when the freshmen get here, he was able to achieve that.
And that's, as CTAs, both of us ourselves, Cadet Brown and myself, we got to see sort of that process during Cadre Week and New Cadet Week. But honestly, you could have fooled me. I wasn't aware of how you guys operated with your first sergeants and whatnot, and that sort of shuffling amongst them so that you can integrate amongst the battalion and whatnot. But right off the bat, at least to me, it seemed like they were already had that close-knit bond. And once again, I think that's just credit to sort of the family motif that we've got going on here in 4th Battalion and the strong identity that the battalion as a whole shares across itself.
Yeah, for sure. And one other thing to add to that is during one of the later days in cadre week, each company, band, November, Oscar, we were all doing our training on the drill field. And us as COs, we came together and we're like, why don't we just rotate for now? See how each other's companies are doing, give any critiques that we see that ourselves might not see looking at our own companies. So I went over to November went to band went to Oscar. And when we finished that, Cadet, you spoke to him last week, Cadet Joe Vocaturo, he came up to me and he said, your cadre have a lot of respect for your first sergeant, and it's very evident. And I was very, very, very happy to hear that, because that was when I also started to realize that same thing and could see the shift when I reflected upon earlier in the week to where we were at that point, that I could see that they were really clicking with each other. And that's just one way that we got lucky with our triad, because Cadet Hunter Manley is a very high achieving, high quality individual. And because of that, he was able to garner their respect and maintain it throughout the rest of Cadre Week and New Cadet Week, and up until where we are in the 6th week of the semester now.
Great stuff. And on just adding on, as we've said before, interacting with Cadet Manley during Cadre Week and New Cadet Week, he was always just so nice to come across, which I'm sure for the freshmen is a surprising thing to hear if any of them end up watching this, because to me, at least, being on the other side of things, I'd see him and he'd be like, "Oh, good morning, how's it going?" Have nice, pleasant conversations. And then he'd go down the stairs and all of a sudden the training began again. However, if you don't mind, I think I'll broach the next question. We were talking about it a little bit before. We had mentioned that idea of identity. And this is something I talked about with the HTs as well last week. 4th Battalion, having been started up just 2 years ago, it wanted to create a strong foundation. Same thing with each of the companies. Last year, though, since Oscar and November were both down on Main Eggleston, for those who aren't aware of that fact, they were very, very, very close together as companies. And now, even though you're still in the same building, you're back on Upper Quad, you're starting to separate some more, and you've got, like, you each have a different tile now, for instance. That's a big thing, at least to me, that shows that still in the same battalion, but now you guys are branching off and becoming more your own companies than ever before. So I sort of want to ask about what you feel Oscar's identity is as a part of 4th Battalion, and things that you want to do, either like the changes that you're looking to make or how you're improving upon that. A very broad question, I understand, but it's always something interesting.
Yeah, of course. So one of our big things, of course, following the mantra of 4th Battalion, wanting to create that family culture, is one thing that I'm really pushing for in the company is, just showing genuine care for everybody, right? Because that's one of the easiest ways that we can build those bonds with each other. Apart from these professional relationships that we're developing, also developing personal relationships. Now, I'm not talking like boyfriend, girlfriend, not all that kind of stuff, but like making those real connections and making good friends that are going to last here and then way off into the future. Because a big thing that the Corps always talks about, right, is, when like gunfighter panels come back, they always talk about, oh yeah, this guy who I graduated with so many years ago, he was in command of another company who I worked with from a whole nother branch to complete this mission, right? And it's really an incredible thing to see how those connections can still be made. And when you get to interact with that person again, it's like you were never apart, right? And we can facilitate that even more by developing this culture in our company. And another big part is when you show genuine care for your people, it makes well-being within the company a lot better as well. Because people know that they can rely on each other, they can confide in one another, and being able to do so really helps to create that bond within the company as well, right? And then we can get that pool. People will see that attitude and that mindset being portrayed to the rest of the Corps. And then people are going to want to desire to come to this company, not just because, we're soft, we care about each other's feelings, but we care about one another, but also understand that there's still a job to get done. And the best way to do that is to make sure everybody's able to perform at their highest level because they know that they're cared for and supported, right? So I think it really goes hand in hand. And that foundation of building that family culture is where it all begins, right? So, for instance, we have a program where we had all the meals with the sophomores, right? Really letting them know what Oscar Company is all about, what they're coming into. And we also started a program where we have a DD sheet for Oscar Company. So to prevent any adverse situations occurring. We're college students, things happen on the weekends. So in order to prevent anything stemming from that, where people could wind up getting in trouble or things like that, we have a sheet where people can sign up to be a DD, call the person, they come and pick them up, bring them back to the dorms, everybody's safe, right? Because that's what really matters. And that's one way we can show that level of care for one another.
It's a very good support group, especially. And as an analogy to add on to that, one of the things I was always told throughout my high school experience, at least, was this idea of a safety net. Sorry, my hands are down there.
Mhm.
The safety net that in elementary school, it's really, really close together. There's almost no holes in it. And then it slowly becomes more and more spread out, and more people start to fall through those cracks until you get to college, where they typically have said it just falls out from under you. That's it. High school is the last time that you had that safety net. Now it's just all up to you.
Mhm.
Joining the Corps, and more specifically 4th Battalion, it still gives you that level of autonomy, but you still have some sort of safety net below you, or maybe you're attached to a rope. The analogy is starting to get lost. But in one way or another, you've got support still, even though you're in college. And I know that I probably would have been floundering if I hadn't been in the Corps myself. Like, I can't imagine being not here, for lack of better words, just because of all of the support that I get here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's always more ways where we can develop that support system. It's just how we're going to explore that and how we're going to implement it, and that's up to my triad, myself, and my staff, as well as all those triads that come after me as well.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I feel like 4th Battalion really is a family, and especially November and Oscar. Ethan, you mentioned we're separating a little bit. I almost feel like even though we're separating a little bit culture-wise, I feel like the companies have grown a little bit closer, because in the new dorms, we are sharing halls together, so we see each other a lot more, and like really that safety net of just seeing people, like it brightens my day every day, just saying hi to somebody. And I think it's a great thing to have. Like, I love the Corps for that reason.
And
Yeah.
hopefully, next year, band as well. Fingers crossed. We'll see. We'll see. That would brighten my day.
And one thing that we're trying to do now too is myself and Cadet Aiden McDonald, right? He's the CO for November Company. We are trying our best to work together to get our companies integrated with each other as well. So because we are going to be together all the time, we are in our own dorms, more or less separated from the Corps, but way closer than we were down in Eggleston. But we understand, that we are each other's closest contacts in terms of companies. November, Oscar, and Band were on the same battalion. Hopefully Band can get into this building next year, right? But that's one of our big things we're trying to do ourselves amongst COs, is trying to get all the companies intermingled with each other as best we can. Because one, we're close together, everybody knows each other decently well. And when I'm saying in regards to like an upperclassman. So we can do a lot of events together to build bonds between the companies. And then also, we know the culture around Band and how some of the other battalions feel about the HTs. But that's something we want to try and do as COs, is give Band as much backup as we can too, to really pull them into 4th Battalion and promote that family culture even more. So we're working with Cadet Vocaturo a bunch as well to try and see what events we can get going that really ties all 3 companies together.
Incredibly validating words right there. Much appreciated from a band cadet myself.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question kind of along those lines. Is like we've talked about, like Oscar, November, and all 4th Battalion. The band, like High Ties, has been here, but 4th Battalion is like brand new, pretty much, like still super new in its infancy. Is there any struggles you've noticed, like trying to like form a whole new culture, a whole new identity as a company?
Right. Well, the struggle I would say we had last year or when I was a sophomore, right? Or let's bring it back. When I was a freshman, right? I've been to a lot of companies. So my freshman year, I was a freshman in Lima company, right? The next year, we knew Mike was about to be the new company, right? Brand new company to the core. I opened up the spreadsheet that said where we were all going. Boom, Mike company. And I was like, oh. Because one, I mean, I was staying in 3rd Battalion, which I appreciated because I knew the 3rd Battalion culture and I had the privilege of being a CTA. But at the same time, it was difficult knowing that I was going to go there without any of my buds. All right. I was, excuse me, the only member of L24 who was going to go to my company. So I didn't have any of my buds with me. Plus, there wasn't anybody else that I knew beforehand who was going into that company as well. And I think that's the struggle of forming a new company, let alone a new battalion, right? Because a lot of times people just get picked and pulled from really everywhere in the Corps. There were people from 1st, 2nd, and other people from 3rd Battalion who got all pushed into Mike, and we had a good time developing that culture sophomore year, right? Us sophomores got pretty close, and it was easier for us to get behind the idea of being in a new company. But for the juniors and seniors that year, it was tough because they had spent either their sophomore year or their sophomore and junior year in another company, really getting to integrate with them, developing those friendships and those bonds, and then getting pulled away from that. It's hard on them, right? And that, again, was one of the tougher things when forming November and Oscar, right? Because I remember I had an idea that I was going. I wasn't surprised when I got the envelope, but I know there were a lot of people who shared some animosity for coming over here. One, because it's something new, and like I just said before, they were getting pulled from those previous relationships and ties that they had already formed, which is hard for anybody. It's same thing like moving from your hometown to a whole nother place. You're moving from what you knew to something else that is new, right? And so that was a struggle that we had last year, was getting the seniors and juniors really bought into the program, right? But we had a lot of strong leaders last year. We were very fortunate to have a lot of very competent individuals who were leading the charge on developing the culture that we have, right? And because of them, we are where we are now. And we are continuing to develop that culture more and more to allow people to have more points to grasp onto. And there are still individuals in 4th Battalion, not so much band, because band, you guys are together all the time, but more so in regards to November and Oscar, that are still trying to find their buy-in into these companies, more so the seniors now, because we were juniors last year who got pulled from as sophomores into 4th Bat. So I think that a lot of that paradigm shift will occur once the current seniors graduate, right? Because then those who are juniors now are going to be seniors, and their first shift from their freshman year was into 4th Bat, right? So that's where their real identity in the Corps started. So I think that if you guys picking up what I'm putting down, I know I just
yeah, no, this is,
yeah.
But yeah, so I think that a lot of that will change once the current seniors graduate from the Corps. And then people who are seniors and juniors take in those leadership positions, all they've known is 4th Battalion, right? So they'll be able to promote that culture even more.
Yeah, I think 100%. Like, I noticed last year, like some of the seniors weren't super thrilled, but by the end of the year, like everyone was like, I feel like everyone in November at least was like really embracing like Viking culture and like just really embracing November. So I think building off of previous class years and stuff, like I've seen like huge strides, especially this year too. Like I'm so glad I got to stay in 4th Battalion. I love it.
I don't forget, but it's always a good reminder. You were November, now you're Oscar. You've been in 4th Battalion as long as some of the current members up, because that's right, it just got started last year. So you've been here just as long as everyone else has. Myself and like all of us here. And it's cool to see because we get to see an evolving organization that's changing and growing and just starting. So now I think I've got the next question.
Mhm.
So sort of circling back to the whole new cadet week, cadre week, things like that. This might be a broad, again, another broad one. Those are the types of questions I really tend to jive with myself.
Mhm.
But if you can pick out a favorite moment that you had that was specifically cadre related, a favorite cadre moment either during the training of the freshmen, the pre-training during cadre week, anything that you might have just seen that either stuck out to you because it was funny or it was inspiring. I know you've already told us about Cadet Manley and how he became integrated with the rest of the cadre staff. But if there's ever a favorite moment that you might have had, things to look forward to in leadership that should encourage freshmen to really go out for things like that in the future and whatnot.
Right. I'd say one of the things that really stuck out to me, it wasn't necessarily a moment, but so to start, the current cadre now, I got to meet when they were sophomores last year, right? Getting to understand who they were and at what point they were at in their leadership, right? So coming into their junior year, them being cadre, me being their CO, and being more so in a role where I'm observing everything and making sure things go well, things run smoothly. Nobody's doing anything that's going to get them in trouble, things like that. Really, damage control. That was more or less what I was doing. And so when the freshmen got here, right, I got to see them practice their training throughout cadre week. But when the freshmen got here, there's a stigma around cadre that all you need to do is yell, be the toughest person in the hallway or wherever you are, and that's what gets the job done. And one thing I was really trying to voice to them, and an idea that they already had themselves, was that is not what the ideal cadre is, right? To be a good cadre, you need to play off of your strengths, right? Because you are going to perform to your strengths better than anybody else will, right? Maybe that yelling and constantly tough all the time attitude works for some people because that's who they are and they know that's who they are. So they play off their strengths. But sometimes people have a more caring and genuine side. Sometimes people have a more analytical side and they look at things more logically and things like that. And that's how they can explain to people why they're doing things and how it's going to work, right? So I was really trying to get that point across to them during cadre week. And one of the things that I really did enjoy seeing is that they didn't all just default to that yelling, intense cadre mindset 24/7 during New Cadet Week. There's times where it needs to happen and times when it works, but when they had those opportunities to really play off of their strengths, they took it and ran, right? I have members of my cadre staff who are, like I said, that more caring, want to make those deeper connections with the people that they lead. I have those that are more logically and analytically strengthened and they think that way, and that's how they can best articulate what they want to say. And then I also have those who are the intense type, right? Not to say they yell all the time, but they are just constantly portraying that intensity and can express the sense of direction that they need everybody to go in that manner, right? So I have a breadth of personalities on my cadre staff, and I'm glad that we do because, right, there's times where you need those intensity, where you need analytical, logical thinkers, and when you need those caring types, right? So being able to have all of that and seeing them develop their own forms of being cadre was really something that stood out to me, because I know that there are some companies where unfortunately they do at the beginning all default to that intense yelling type. But seeing that my cadre really took to heart what I was saying and played off of their own strengths was something that was really neat to see.
You have to sort of strategize, plug and play, be like, oh,
Yeah.
this is or I guess they did that themselves is sort of what you were going for there, but that was probably something that was interesting for me to start to understand as well during my freshman year, is that it isn't just about yelling, and they're not simply yelling to yell
Mhm.
and to hear their own voices. That's not what their intent is, at least not for our training and for the rest of 4th Battalion. There's intent behind it, which is what they always, of course, told us. I'm sure Cadet Brown probably figures, it's like, oh, yes, that sounds familiar. But at the end of the day, that is the truth. And it's a hard conclusion to come to, but when you do, you start to have a attitude change. So if any freshmen do watch this, take that little bit that Conley just said. There is intent to everything. Cadre will play to their strengths and try to get you the best training possible because it's all for you guys.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ethan. Like, I think every freshman has that kind of realization, maybe like halfway through spring semester, like, I don't think they were just yelling at me to yell at me. I think they actually cared a little bit. And the more and more you go on, the more you realize your cadre cares so much about you. And especially to all those new cadets, they end up watching this, is like your cadre care a great deal about you and they just want you to see you succeed. And I think we have enough time for about one more question. So I'm gonna make it a quick one. So Will, if you had to go back to New Cadet Week, Cadre Week, and just had to redo one thing, what would it be?
That's a good question. Give me a second to think real quick.
Oh yeah, no problem. It doesn't have to be anything big. It could be like maybe I wouldn't have gotten that gravy with that biscuit or something.
Everything was perfect about that week. Everything went
Oh yeah.
100% according to plan, 10 times out of 10. No mistakes, no problems. Surely.
I would say that one thing that I'm learning now, being in the position that I'm in, is that being a commander is not just about, caring for your people. It very much so is a large part of that. But it's finding the balance between caring for your people and ensuring that the mission gets done. Right. So that's one thing that I'm learning now and I'm putting into practice. But that was something that I wish that I knew during New Cadet Week and Cadre Week, right? Because while you do want to care for your people, it's very important and it helps your organization to grow and flourish. You also need to ensure that in doing so, you're not inhibiting yourself from completing the mission. So, for example, during Cadre Week and New Cadet Week, right, there's more so during New Cadet Week, the cadre's mission is to be able to train and develop the freshmen to get to the point where they can perform well during the freshman parade, right? But throughout that process, the freshmen go through a lot of hardships, right? A lot of doubts, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. That's a very normal part of it, and it was expressed to them that one of the resources they could use were the counselors that were available to them. And a lot of them, and I'm speaking in general for the regiment, the counselors got used a lot during New Cadet Week. And that was very different than the past 2 years from what I've gotten to see, because I got to see how New Cadet Week was as a CTA and as a cadre myself. And that was a big shift this year, was that a lot of the freshmen, it was either that they knew that they could and they didn't know the previous 2 years, or there was a different shift in the mindsets that the freshmen came into the Corps with, right? Nothing wrong with that, right? We're all our own generations and we all think differently. But that was a big shift from the past 2 years. And when speaking to myself from this past New Cadet Week, I was very quick to immediately go to portraying that caring attitude to the freshmen. Not to say that that was wrong, but there's definitely, like I said, a balance you need to find between getting them the care and support that they need while also not limiting the training that they're going to get as well. Right? Because sometimes I felt that I went right to the counselor solution too quick. Right? I was like, okay, something's wrong. You're experiencing like maybe a mental health challenge or something like that. We need to get you in contact with the counselor. Versus what I maybe in some instances failed to see was that it wasn't as serious as I thought it was. Right? Because I would just jump to the conclusion, okay, they need a counselor as soon as possible. But in doing so, they would get pulled out of the training that they could receive, and that resulting in them potentially being further behind in the training or not at the point where we wanted them to be at that moment. Right? So that is where I wish I would have done better during New Cadet Week. Not to say that the freshmen weren't where they needed to be. They still performed well. We still looked good during the parade. But in hindsight, that was something that I could have improved upon. And something that I'm working on now is balancing having that care for my people while also understanding that a mission still needs to get done.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that too. And I'm sure Cadet Hominick could say the same thing. We definitely saw the counselors being used a lot more this year. And
We had to fetch a whole bunch of them from the counselors too. That was a primary task for the CTAs this past New Cadet Week, was getting people back from Cook or Main Egg or wherever they happen to be.
Yeah, and like I say that as well because there was some, so I had training as an RA, so there were probably some of those instances I could have handled myself. But instead I jumped to the counselor solution too quick, which pulled them from training.
And I guess, to sort of think about it in an alternate way, the sorts of lessons that you learned through your own personal, I don't want to use the word failure. That's a bit extreme, but you understand the connotation I'm going for. And having this recorded on this podcast for anyone in 4th Battalion to watch, especially for the co-hosts here who are getting firsthand experience about this and advice and life tips for leadership possibly in the future. It's just, it shows that it's going to continue to evolve. As we've been talking about, that's kind of been the main linking thread in almost all of what we've talked about on this podcast, at least, is seeing 4th Battalion continue to grow. And it's through these lessons that you guys are learning now that hopefully we don't make the same mistakes, and any mistakes that we make, hopefully the next generation after doesn't. And it just keeps going. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And then I think a good way to wrap up this one.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for coming on, dude. And I know you have a test to take sometime soon, so we'll let you go ahead and do that. But thanks again, man, for coming out and being on our podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, boys.
Yep. No
Thank you
problem,
so
man.
much.
All right.
See ya.
See you guys.